Welcome. Every time you send a message, every time you open an app, stream a song, store a file, or train a machine to learn, you're using a theory most people have never heard of. A theory that turned the chaos of human communication into the clean language of ones and zeros. That theory came from one man, a quiet, eccentric engineer with a love for juggling, unicycles, and building mechanical mice in his basement. His name was Claude Shannon. And in 1948, he wrote a paper that silently changed the world. Not with a dramatic invention, but with a mathematical idea so powerful, it became the foundation of everything digital. This is the story of how Claude Shannon taught machines to listen, how he helped define the very concept of information, and how his strange, brilliant mind shaped the technologies we now call intelligent. Before we dive in, are you enjoying these deep dives into the history of technology? Let us know in the comments what you'd like to explore next, from famous inventors to forgotten prototypes, from AI to analog. If you're into strange genius stories, mechanical puzzles, and the quiet revolutions behind your screen, hit that share button, maybe subscribe, or toss this episode to a friend who still thinks information theory sounds like science fiction. All right, let's meet the man who turned thought into math. Claude Shannon didn't set out to change the world. He just liked puzzles, things that clicked, turned, twisted, or blinked. Locks, switches, radios, ropes, circuits. He was never far from a toolbox or a question. And long before anyone called him the father of information theory, he was just a kid from Gaylord, Michigan, taking apart everything he could find. Claude Elwood Shannon was born on April 30th, 1916, in the small town of Petoskey, Michigan, and raised in nearby Gaylord, a quiet place defined by farmland, open air, and mechanical intuition. His father, also named Claude, was a self-taught inventor and businessman. His mother, Mabel, worked as a school principal, a role that would shape Shannon's lifelong comfort with math, logic, and independent learning. The family wasn't wealthy, but Shannon's childhood was rich in something else: freedom to tinker. He built things. Wire telegraphs with a friend, stretched across neighborhood houses. A makeshift elevator in his home. An early radio, crafted from scavenged parts. Shannon wasn't just playing. He was learning how systems work. Not by reading manuals, by testing feedback, by seeing what responded, what broke, and what could be made to signal. By the time Shannon reached high school, it was clear he had talent. He loved mathematics, not as a performance, but as a personal language. He read books on calculus, worked out puzzles in the margins, and spent hours solving problems long past the bell. But he wasn't the kind of student most teachers noticed. He was quiet, introverted, and rarely made a scene. His gift wasn't for speaking loudly, it was for thinking clearly. In 1932, he graduated from high school at 16 and enrolled at the University of Michigan, where he pursued a double major in mathematics and electrical engineering, a pairing that would prove fateful. He studied Boolean algebra, a mathematical system developed in the 19th century by George Boole to express logic using only true, false values. At the time, Boolean logic was considered an abstract idea, a curiosity from the world of pure math. Shannon saw something different. He saw a way to build logic, not in theory, but in circuitry. After graduating in 1936, Shannon was accepted into a master's program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. There, he worked at the famed MIT Differential Analyzer Lab, maintaining and programming one of the world's most advanced analog computing machines, a monstrous room-sized contraption made of gears, pulleys, and rotating shafts. It was noisy, beautiful, and slightly insane, an analog computer designed to solve differential equations through mechanical motion. While working with the machine, Shannon had a moment of clarity. Why should logic remain theoretical? Why not design digital switches that embody logic? He realized that electrical relays, the basic on-off switches in phone circuits, could physically represent Boolean logic operations like and, or, and not. It was a stunning insight. Shannon's 1937 master's thesis, titled A Symbolic Analysis of Relay and Switching Circuits, demonstrated that electrical circuits could do logic, and that digital computation could be built on this foundation. It's often called the most important master's thesis of the 20th century. Why? Because it bridged two worlds: the abstract logic of mathematics, the physical world of electrical engineering. It was the birth of digital circuit design, and by extension, the theoretical foundation of modern computers. What made Shannon different wasn't just brilliance, it was his instinct to play with ideas. He built juggling robots and unicycling automatons in his spare time. He invented strange contraptions that solved mazes, flipped coins, and composed music randomly. To Shannon, ideas were puzzles, and puzzles were languages, systems of symbols, rules, and transformation. This playful instinct helped him move between disciplines. He wasn't confined to mathematics, or engineering, or physics. He lived at their intersection. And while his thesis earned him praise within engineering circles, Shannon wasn't seeking acclaim. He preferred a quiet lab, a fresh puzzle, and time to think. Still, word of his work spread, and soon he was recruited to Bell Telephone Laboratories, then one of the most advanced research facilities in the world. It was at Bell Labs that Shannon would write the paper that changed everything. But before he could redefine information, he had to survive a war. Claude Shannon was still in his 20s. He had already redefined what it meant to build a circuit. And now the world was about to plunge into a conflict powered by communication, where secrecy, clarity, and signal would become a matter of life and death. And he was listening. In 1941, America went to war, and Claude Shannon, now in his mid-20s, found himself in a world where signal and noise weren't just metaphors. They were battle lines. The war would become a test of communication. Encrypted messages, wireless relays, radar detection, jamming, scrambling, uncertainty. And in the middle of this technical storm stood Bell Labs. And inside Bell Labs, Claude Shannon. Founded in 1925 as the research arm of AT&T, Bell Telephone Laboratories wasn't your typical corporate office. It was a scientific dream factory. It housed Nobel Prize winners, mathematicians, physicists, engineers, all under one roof. Its halls were filled with prototypes, punch cards, switchboards, and ideas decades ahead of their time. When Shannon arrived in 1941, he was given immense freedom. No dress code, no rigid hierarchy. He could walk into a lab, propose a theory, and start testing it the next day. At Bell Labs, curiosity was currency, and Claude Shannon was rich with it. Shannon's work during the war focused on two main problems: cryptography, the science of secure communication radar and signal detection, the challenge of extracting meaningful patterns from noise. At first glance, these seemed like separate fields, but Shannon saw something deeper. They both involved uncertainty. They both involved probability, and they both depended on information, how it was encoded, transmitted, and decoded. Shannon was especially intrigued by the work of British cryptologists at Bletchley Park, including Alan Turing, whose efforts to break the Nazi Enigma code changed the course of the war. Turing and Shannon actually met in 1943 at Bell Labs during one of Turing's visits to the US. Though their conversations remain largely undocumented, we know this. They spoke at length about logic, encryption, and machines that process symbols, and they understood one another. Two minds, separated by background, but united by vision. During the war, the US military relied heavily on long-distance communication, often by radio, which made messages vulnerable to interception, degradation due to distance, interference, or terrain, deliberate jamming by enemy forces. To ensure command and control reliability, engineers had to grapple with a new challenge. How do you maximize meaning in a message when you can't guarantee the channel will cooperate? This is where Shannon's brilliance began to surface. He realized that every communication system, no matter how simple or complex, could be broken down into a few core parts. A source, the origin of the message. An encoder that translates the message into signals. A channel which transmits the signal. Noise, any interference or distortion along the way. A decoder which tries to reconstruct the original message. A destination, the final recipient. This model, now called the Shannon communication model, is still taught in textbooks today. And Shannon saw something else, that even noise could be quantified, that uncertainty could be measured, that information wasn't just content, it was a mathematical property. As the war ended, Shannon kept writing, and in 1948, he released a paper in the Bell System Technical Journal that would quietly revolutionize the world. It was titled, A Mathematical Theory of Communication. It did not start with a bang. There were no emotional appeals, no grand rhetoric, just math, precision, clarity. But in its pages, Shannon introduced several foundational concepts that would go on to shape modern computing, telecommunications, cryptography, and even artificial intelligence. Here are some of the most critical ideas. Information as entropy. Shannon borrowed a concept from thermodynamics. Entropy, a measure of disorder or unpredictability. He used it to define information mathematically. The more unpredictable a message is, the more information it contains. A random string like X8L_V29 carries more informational entropy than a simple repetition like A. Why does this matter? Because it allows you to calculate how much information a message contains, how much redundancy is in the system, how much you can compress without losing meaning, how much error correction you'll need over a noisy channel. It was a complete reimagining of communication, not as content, but as probability. The bit, though. Shannon didn't invent the term, he popularized the bit, short for binary digit, as the fundamental unit of information. A bit answers a yes/no question. Is it on or off? True or false? Heads or tails? Everything else, text, images, sound, even video, could be broken down into sequences of bits. This was the bridge between meaning and machinery. It made human thought measurable and machine readable, the noisy channel theorem. One of Shannon's most profound insights was this. Even in a noisy system, with distortion, interference, or loss. It is possible to transmit information perfectly, as long as the rate of noise stays below a calculable threshold. This became known as the Shannon limit, the theoretical maximum speed at which data can be transmitted over a channel with a given amount of noise. Modern technologies like Wi-Fi, 5G, optical fiber, satellite links, streaming video, all rely on techniques inspired by this theorem. At first, Shannon's paper didn't make headlines. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't easy to read. It was technical, dense, and utterly transformative. As his friend and colleague Warren Weaver later wrote, it came as a bombshell and is still reverberating. In the years that followed, Shannon's ideas were applied to data compression, e.g. zip files, JPEGs, error detection and correction, e.g. checksums, parity bits, cryptography and secure communication, neural networks and machine learning, cognitive psychology, especially in memory and perception, genetic information processing, drawing analogies to DNA. He had given the world a new way to think about thought. While the world rebuilt after the war, Shannon had quietly rewritten the blueprint of modern communication. He wasn't interested in selling his ideas. He didn't chase the spotlight. But in labs, universities, and eventually on every computer chip, his theory took hold. Information had become math. Thought had become signal. And intelligence, once abstract, had been encoded. By the 1950s, Claude Shannon had changed the way we understood communication. Now, he turned his attention to something even more mysterious: thinking itself. Could a machine make decisions? Could it learn from patterns? Could it solve problems, not just calculate? These weren't abstract questions for Shannon. They were puzzles. And he was always up for a challenge. Let's begin with a curious invention from 1950. Shannon, now a senior researcher at Bell Labs, built a device he called Theseus, named after the Greek hero who navigated the labyrinth. It wasn't just a toy. It was a robotic mouse, placed inside a maze of metal squares, each with hidden magnetic relays under the floor. As the mouse moved through the maze, it triggered the relays, which recorded its path and learned from its mistakes. When the mouse hit a dead end, it would backtrack and try a new route. After a few runs, it could solve the maze from any starting point, quickly and correctly. The brilliance was in the mouse's memory. It wasn't stored in the mouse itself, but in the maze's circuitry. This was an early form of externalized memory, and a powerful demonstration of feedback learning. For Shannon, it proved something simple and profound. Intelligence didn't have to be biological. It could be mechanical, as long as it used feedback to correct itself. Shannon didn't stop with the mouse. His workshop, part laboratory, part toy box, became a home for dozens of strange contraptions, including a mechanical juggling machine that could toss 3 balls in perfect arcs, a unicycle-riding robot, balanced by gyroscopes and servos, a 2-player mechanical game that could predict and counter human moves, a machine that played simplified chess using built-in strategies. Each of these wasn't just for fun, though Shannon loved fun. They were working models of machine behavior, examples of systems that could sense, respond, and act with some degree of autonomy. And then came a question that would define an entire era. Could machines think? Let's rewind to 1943. Claude Shannon and Alan Turing, 2 of the most important minds in the history of computing, briefly crossed paths at Bell Labs. Turing was working on speech encryption for the Allies. Shannon was designing secure telephone systems and researching information entropy. Both were fascinated by the idea of symbol processing machines. Both had mathematical minds shaped by logic and war. Turing had already written his famous 1936 paper on the universal machine, a theoretical device capable of computing anything computable. He had also posed the question, can machines think? By the 1950s, that question was gathering momentum in academic circles, and a new field was being born. Shannon didn't join the new wave of artificial intelligence researchers directly, but he was, in many ways, their invisible mentor. His ideas about signal processing, pattern recognition, binary logic, memory and feedback, probabilistic inference formed the mathematical skeleton of early AI. He showed that intelligence didn't require neurons, just structure. One of Shannon's most famous contributions to the AI debate came in 1950, when he published a short but influential paper titled "Programming a Computer for Playing Chess." At the time, computers were primitive. Few believed they could ever match a human at a game as complex as chess. But Shannon disagreed. He proposed two types of strategies for machine players. Type A strategy, brute force, evaluating every possible move and countermove. Type B strategy, selective, evaluating only promising moves using heuristics and judgment. Type B, he argued, would better mimic human intuition. The paper didn't describe an actual program, but it laid out the logic for what would later become chess-playing algorithms like Minimax, and eventually Deep Blue, the first computer to beat a world chess champion. Shannon's paper sparked a generation of research. It showed that strategic reasoning could be broken down, step by step, into decisions a machine could simulate. And it did something else. It raised philosophical questions about human thought. If a machine can win at chess, does it understand the game? Or is it just simulating understanding? Shannon didn't give answers. He gave frameworks, tools for asking better questions. Despite his deep interest in machine behavior, Shannon remained skeptical of grand claims. He never joined the chorus of early AI researchers who promised intelligent computers were just around the corner. He preferred to work with what could be measured, modeled, or proven. In a 1956 interview, when asked whether machines could someday think like humans, Shannon smiled and said, "Let's be careful with words like think. They have baggage." He understood that machines could mimic parts of intelligence, memory, pattern recognition, strategy, without possessing consciousness, intention, or emotion. In an era when AI was quickly becoming mythology, Shannon remained grounded. His machines didn't try to be human. They tried to be logical. Claude Shannon never claimed to build a mind, but he showed us that the logic of thought could be encoded, that patterns of behavior could be mechanized, and that complexity could arise from simple binary rules, repeated and refined. His machines didn't speak, but they acted. Not with awareness, but with structure. And in their quiet circuits, he revealed something profound. That intelligence might just be information in motion. Claude Shannon didn't invent the transistor. He didn't write software or build the first computer. He didn't launch rockets or design networks. But in many ways, none of those things would work the way they do without him. Because behind every digital interaction, every wireless message, every compressed file, every streaming video, every smart machine, is a silent logic that Shannon defined. In this segment, we trace the spread of Shannon's work, outward from the lab and into the world. After Shannon published A Mathematical Theory of Communication in 1948, It took time for the scientific world to absorb its depth. But once they did, the floodgates opened. His theory gave engineers and scientists a powerful toolkit for handling real-world communication problems. How much bandwidth is needed for clear voice transmission? How do you correct for data loss over long distances? What's the maximum amount of compression possible without destroying meaning? From the 1950s onward, these questions became engineering realities, and Shannon's math made them solvable. Entire industries began applying his models. Telecommunications. Shannon's work became central to the design of long-distance networks: telephone, fax, radio, and eventually the internet. Space exploration. NASA used Shannon's error correction principles in space probes, allowing distant spacecraft to transmit data over billions of miles. Digital media. Compression algorithms like JPEG, MP3, and MPEG are grounded in Shannon's entropy formulas, balancing file size with quality. Mobile technology. Every mobile call, text, and app communication obeys Shannon's limits, optimizing data rate, signal strength, and error tolerance. As computing advanced, Shannon's influence only deepened. Without him, there's no Wi-Fi, no 4G or 5G, no Bluetooth, fiber optics, or satellite TV. He gave us a universal map for sending meaning through chaos. But Shannon's theory didn't just apply to electronics. In the 1950s and 60s, biologists began noticing something strange. The way DNA encodes proteins, using sequences of bases, A, T, C, G, looked a lot like a language, a four-letter alphabet, a stream of symbols, an error-prone channel, the cell, that needed redundancy and correction. In other words, a perfect fit for information theory. Molecular biologists like Francis Crick and George Gamow began using Shannon's ideas to understand genetic encoding, mutation rates, and biological noise. They asked, how much information is stored in a gene? How much redundancy exists in the genetic code to guard against errors? Can we model evolution as an information process? Adaptation through signal correction? Even today, modern genomics uses Shannon entropy to measure genetic diversity, variation, and information flow between populations. Claude Shannon never studied biology, but biology adopted his math to understand life itself. As cognitive science grew in the mid-20th century, researchers began to rethink the brain, not as a mystical organ of emotion and spirit, but as a machine that processes inputs, encodes signals, and learns through feedback. Sound familiar? Psychologists and neuroscientists borrowed directly from Shannon. Neural firing was modeled as a probabilistic signal, perception as a filter for signal versus noise, short-term memory as a limited capacity channel, learning as an optimization of noisy inputs. George Miller's 1956 paper, The Magical Number 7, plus or minus 2, showed that people could hold about 7 bits of information in working memory, explicitly tying cognition to Shannon's unit of measurement. In essence, our minds were modeled using the same framework that Shannon had developed for telephones. Today, machine learning and neuroscience remain deeply intertwined, both exploring how systems encode, store, and adapt to information. And at the root, the same principles Shannon uncovered in a wartime lab. Shannon's ideas also reached into more unexpected places. 1. Economics and game theory. Decision-making under uncertainty, a key area in economics, began to use information entropy to model risk, prediction, and market behavior. Game theory incorporated information flow as part of strategic decision trees, especially in high-stakes environments like auctions or negotiations. 2. Linguistics and natural language. Shannon had a lifelong fascination with language. In fact, one of his famous experiments involved analyzing the redundancy of English by asking humans to guess the next letter in a sentence. He discovered that English has a predictable structure with about 50% redundancy, meaning a good chunk of our language isn't carrying new information, but reinforcing what's already there. This finding influenced text compression, speech recognition, natural language processing, NLP, statistical machine translation. Without Shannon, there's no GPT, Siri, or Google Translate. Because at the heart of all machine language systems is a simple idea: how do we quantify meaning? Shannon didn't give us the full answer, but he showed us how to start measuring it. 3. AI and learning. As artificial intelligence evolved, Shannon's theories were applied to neural networks, which balance signal propagation with loss, decision trees, which split based on entropy reduction, reinforcement learning, which uses Shannon's framework to explore and optimize strategies over time. In essence, many modern AI systems are information engines. They seek to reduce uncertainty, increase prediction accuracy, and adapt to noisy environments. Exactly as Shannon described. Finally, Shannon's influence runs deep in the age of cybersecurity and digital privacy. During World War II, he secretly authored a classified report titled A Mathematical Theory of Cryptography. This laid the groundwork for modern encryption, from secure passwords to blockchain. In it, Shannon introduced the concept of perfect secrecy, a system where the ciphertext reveals nothing about the original message without the key. He proved that one-time pads, random keys used only once, were mathematically unbreakable if used correctly. Today, encryption algorithms like AES, RSA, and others all follow principles derived from Shannon's early cryptographic thinking. As the world becomes increasingly digital and increasingly vulnerable to surveillance, Shannon's work becomes not just useful, but foundational to freedom. Claude Shannon didn't chase attention. He didn't build an empire. He didn't even write many books. But his fingerprints are everywhere, from your phone to your genes, from your mind to your modem, from the symbols you speak to the signals you send. Claude Shannon gave us the grammar of the digital world. And with it, he changed how we measure meaning, how we transmit truth, and how we understand the systems all around us. Claude Shannon didn't seek fame. He didn't try to monetize his ideas. He never branded himself, never built a company, never filed patents for wealth. He taught machines how to think, then quietly rode away on a unicycle. In this final chapter, we explore the lasting legacy of Claude Shannon, the mathematician, engineer, juggler, philosopher, and father of information theory. After the publication of his 1948 paper, Shannon became a figure of immense respect in scientific circles. He was offered prestigious positions, fellowships, and honorary degrees. He lectured across disciplines, from electrical engineering to philosophy. But Shannon remained deeply private. He married Betty Shannon, a mathematician and computer pioneer in her own right, in 1949. They moved to a quiet home in Winchester, Massachusetts, and built a lab in the basement. Not a corporate lab, not a government lab, a personal lab filled with half-finished gadgets, soldering tools, custom-built machines, and juggling pins. Shannon believed play was not a distraction from serious thought, but often the best way into it. He once said, "Serious thinking can be done in the spirit of play." In fact, it works better that way. He filled his workshop with puzzles. He built flame-throwing trumpets. He invented a box that does nothing. When you flip a switch, a mechanical finger pops out and turns it off again. It was absurd, pointless, hilarious, and deeply Shannon. Even in retirement, he continued to publish. He wrote about juggling theory, investing models, and the mathematics of poker. He never chased legacy, but it found him anyway. Though he avoided the spotlight, accolades found their way to Shannon. In 1966, he received the National Medal of Science. In 1985, he was awarded the Kyoto Prize, often called the Nobel of Technology. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, MIT, and Bell Labs, both established professorships in his name. In 2001, IEEE renamed its highest honor in information theory as the Claude E. Shannon Award. But Shannon himself never made much of titles. When MIT proposed a grand ceremony in his honor, he reportedly responded, "Sure, but will there be time for ping pong?" In the 1990s, Shannon was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It was a cruel irony. A man who had done more than anyone to define memory, communication, and cognition was slowly losing his own. His final years were quiet. He spent time with family. He played with grandchildren. He tinkered less, spoke less. And on February 24, 2001, Claude Shannon passed away at the age of 84. No grand headlines, no televised eulogies, but in the places where it mattered, labs, classrooms, research institutes, fiber optic cables, his name was whispered with reverence. He had built the architecture of modern thought, and he left behind a world that spoke in bits, just as he predicted. In many ways, we live in Shannon's world. Smartphones compress your voice using his entropy equations. Satellites beam encrypted data using Shannon's limits. Streaming platforms optimize resolution using his bandwidth formulas. Neural networks train by reducing entropy. Just as Shannon described genetic analysis, machine translation, cryptocurrency, and AI ethics all sit on the mathematical foundations he laid. And still, outside of academic circles, few know his name. Ask someone on the street who invented the telephone, the light bulb, or the internet. They'll have guesses. Ask who gave us the science behind all of them, and you'll hear silence. But that's fitting. Shannon was never interested in noise. He gave us the signal. What makes Shannon's story so remarkable is that his genius was matched by humility. He never claimed to understand everything. He didn't dress like a prophet or speak like a salesman. He didn't want to change the world. He wanted to understand it. To take something messy and find its hidden logic. To ask, what if we could measure meaning? What if thought had a structure? What if we could turn uncertainty into clarity? Claude Shannon didn't just invent a theory. He gave us a lens. One we now use, often without realizing, to decode the world around us. From the genes inside us to the machines beside us. to the minds we hope to build next. Claude Shannon showed us that even the most complex systems begin with a simple yes or no. That thought itself can be seen, shaped, shared. He never craved attention, but the world he helped create now runs on his logic. So the next time your message gets through, the next time your machine learns something new, remember the quiet man who made it all possible, not with noise, but with signal. We measure time in seconds, distance in meters, weight in grams. But meaning? That we owe to Claude Shannon. He gave us the tools to understand the invisible, to tame chaos into signal, to make memory, logic, and learning quantifiable. Not because he chased power, but because he loved puzzles. If you've made it this far with us, thank you. We hope the story of Claude Shannon left you thinking a little differently about the systems all around you. And if you enjoyed this quiet walk through history, consider sharing it with someone else who loves strange machines, quiet geniuses, or the poetry of logic. Tap subscribe if you'd like more calm journeys through the world of artificial minds. And don't hesitate to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what other stories from the world of technology, theory, or thought you'd like us to explore next. Until then, keep thinking clearly and listening closely. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes all it takes is one signal to change everything.